What's up, guys? Today I wanted to make an updated video talking about the S10 5G versus the S10 Plus versus the S10 versus the S10e. This is my favorite, some of my favorite older flagships to recommend to people. The S10 series might be my favorite in the Note 10 Plus series. Those are like my favorite, and the OnePlus 7 Pro. Those are like my top favorites to recommend to people. Also the LG V60, you really can't go wrong with that one either. But these phones have so much to offer, especially software wise, and they're so cheap. And I'm going to do a video on why you should get an older flagship versus a mid-range. A lot of people struggle with that, and I do get it. There are some things about mid-range phones that are definitely great, like the high refresh rate, but we'll get into that in the next video. The reason I'm doing this refresh is just to let people know I actually have comparisons for all of these phones. I have videos on all of these phones, so for all the new people that ask, definitely just go on YouTube, whatever phone you want to see. I literally have tons of comparisons. So you just type in, let's say for instance, S10 Plus, and then you would put Matthews Tech, and you will see all of my older videos. You'll see unboxings, comparisons, just a ton of content going over One UI, just a ton of comparisons and stuff like that for all of these phones. So definitely check those older videos out if you wanted to see a comparison. All right, so these are older flagship phones. They are very unique in their own right, especially compared to newer flagship phones, even mid-range phones, because they're super cheap, right? All of these phones are in the range of $300 to $200. So very cheap phones, and they offer a ton. So let's go ahead and talk about just the build quality of these phones and the size, because that is definitely the most important thing, the size of these phones. So if you're choosing between these phones, you can see I got them from biggest to smallest. And obviously if you want a phone with the biggest screen, you would go with the S10 5G here. You can see it's a big screen, around 6.7 inches. The S10 Plus is 6.4 inches, the S10 is 6.1 inches, and then the S10e is 5.8 inches. If you want a phone that is extremely compact, I highly recommend the S10e. It is fantastic size, extremely comfortable to hold, and I do mean extremely comfortable. Easily use this phone with one hand. I actually like to do gaming on this phone as well too, just because of how comfortable it is. You can just game comfortably with one hand, and just doing anything on this phone, web browsing, it is awesome. So if you have smaller hands, I would highly recommend you guys go with the S10e here. Just if we're going off size, it is extremely comfortable to use with one hand. And also I would say the S10 as well too, because it's really not that much bigger than the S10e, interestingly enough. And it actually has a somewhat better display, which we will get into. But yes, it is a bit bigger, but as you can see, it's really not that much bigger, right? You only get into sort of the bigger phones with the S10 Plus and the S10 5G. But if you watch a lot of content, you're obviously going to want the biggest display, and that's going to be the S10 5G. But if this phone feels too big or it looks too big for you at 6.7 inches, the S10 Plus is probably a perfect size for you as well, because it's 6.4, but it doesn't feel small either. So as far as comfortable to hold, all of these phones are pretty comfortable, except when you get to the S10 5G. It's just, it's a big phone. Alright, so hardware wise, there is something to note about the hardware on all of these phones. All of these phones have stereo speakers. They all have a headphone jack. They all have glass and metal designs. They all have IP68 dust and water resistant. The biggest difference here is that none of these phones have 5G except for the S10 5G, but all of these phones, the S10 Plus, the S10 and S10e, have micro SD card support, but the S10 5G does not. So that's a big hardware difference. If you're somebody that downloads a ton of content on your phone, the biggest difference is no SD card support, SD card support. So if you're somebody that does that, you're definitely going to want to consider these three and not the S10 5G. If you're somebody that wants an older flagship with 5G, typically you're going to have to be on Verizon, because these phones are hard to find unlocked. The S10 5G is hard to find unlocked. So you're going to be on Verizon. If you're okay with that, then definitely go for that. But those are going to be your biggest hardware differences. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the displays. So we already kind of went over the display sizes. Here's the thing you need to know about the displays. All of these phones have a 1440p display or a 2K display except for the S10e, which it doesn't really need it because looking at all of them side by side, it looks just as good as these because it's just a much smaller display. It's 1080p, but it still has a high PPI. Here's sort of the thing that you may or may not like. So the S10 and the S10e have a single punch hole. The S10 Plus and S10 5G have a double punch hole. To me, the double punch hole doesn't really bother me that much, but I can see how it could be bothering, to some people though, and you might not care about having that extra depth sensor. So like I said, I wouldn't let the double punch hole dissuade you from buying the phone because once you start using it, you really your eyes sort of ignore it very quickly. So that's something to definitely take into consideration. But like I said, all of these phones have beautiful Super AMOLED displays. Dynamic AMOLED displays, and they are just awesome to look at. They're awesome to game on. They're just great displays in general, guys. So definitely take that into consideration. A lot of people ask, is there a big difference with the 1080p panel on the S10e? In my opinion, no. It looks extremely good. It still looks just as good as the other flagships. So definitely take that into consideration. Also, the S10 just looks awesome. It's like watching 1440p on such a phone that's really comfortable to hold is just really, really nice. So these phones are all capable of running Android 12 with One UI 4.1. They all have the Snapdragon 855 chip on here. Now all of these phones are in their security patch stages, so they will get approximately 3 years of security patches that is, promised from Samsung themselves. And these phones will not get Android 13. So I want to go ahead and clarify that for the people that ask. No, they won't get Android 13. They will only get security patches. So just like now, if we go to my settings, you can see the S10e, it's on One UI 4.1, but it's still getting, you can see overall stability. Your device has been improved, and then if you go to the docs, you can see what Samsung added as far as features and stuff like that. So if they release, let's say, a One UI 4.2, these phones will most likely get them, but these phones will not get One UI 5 or Android 13. So I want to go ahead and clarify that for you guys. They will be in their security patch stages. Alright, so one of the things that I really love about all of these phones is that they all have the same software features. So just for the S10e, for example, they all have Samsung desktop support. They all have secure folders. They all have just everything, reverse wireless charging on here. They all basically do the same thing. So that's another question that I get. Are the features different? No, none of the features are different on these phones. They all do the exact same thing software wise. Alright, so I do want to go ahead and touch on gaming performance on here as well too. So I dropped multiple gaming tests on these devices here, and basically the best thing about buying an older flagship, and we're going to get into that topic with older flagship versus mid-range, especially for the price. If you're somebody that plays PUBG competitively or you play games on your phone, you typically do not want to get a mid-range phone. There are some mid-range phones with some pretty strong chips like the Poco X3 Pro. As you can see here, if I go ahead and go to PUBG, this is what mid-range phones won't be able to do. Let's say for instance the Galaxy A53 or the A52. You can see you can't play these games on HDR Extreme like PUBG. So I said, if you're somebody that plays PUBG, does it really make sense to get a phone that won't be able to play? Like I'm saying, if you're a competitive player, you want the great settings and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense to spend more money because the S10, the A53 is like $400. It makes sense to get this phone that's around like 280. Even these are much cheaper, and you have the same graphic settings. You have PUBG on extreme FPS, and it plays awesome. Like, it just plays so great. Not only PUBG, but just any game you throw at it. The Snapdragon 855 chip is going to be much better than the mid-range chips that they put, in the A52 or A53 mid-range phones. So definitely keep that into consideration. These older flagships, they're just going to be much better for gaming performance. I truly stand by that. I highly recommend you guys take that into consideration if you're a gamer, because I'm telling you, you're going to be upset when your phone is, when you get a mid-range and the game is lagging. And in general, and like I said, I'm going to show you guys, most of those mid-range phones, they're not even going to be as fast as these older flagships in terms of launching applications, in terms of staying speedy when you're just launching apps and just flying and multitasking and going through stuff. I'm telling you, those mid-range chips, they start to lag and stuff like that. That's why I typically don't show you guys mid-range phones on this channel, because I don't think they're worth it for the price, right? So definitely take that into consideration here. Another thing I think we should touch on is battery life. So best battery life, easily the S10 5G. Extremely impressive battery life, man. Very impressive. All of these phones can get up to 6 hours of screen on time, but for best battery life, it literally goes in this order. So it would be the S10 5G, S10 Plus, S10, and then the S10e actually has, excuse me, so the S10e, when I said 6 hours, I meant these phones. The S10e cannot get 6 hours, so that's the only thing about this phone. Typically, you're looking at like 4 hours and 30 minutes because it's just a smaller battery. That's why they typically don't make small flagship phones anymore, because that was the biggest complaint with this phone. Is the battery life. It's not that great, especially if you're a gamer. You can easily kill the phone, have to charge it, you know, stuff like that. So take that into consideration. That is the one trade-off for having such a small phone. Alright, so one thing I wanted to mention was the S10e, to me, has the best fingerprint scanner. It's got a physical one. It's the only one with a physical one, and they put it in such a spot. I love this spot. It just feels natural. Like when you unlock a in-display fingerprint sensor, it works fine, but this one just feels so unconscious. Like it just feels so natural. Like you don't think about unlocking this phone. Like it just unlocks and you don't really think about it because you're already turning the phone on, and typically, you know, it's just gonna unlock. So that's one thing that I really love about the S10e, by the way. What else did I want to touch on? Oh, speaker quality. Yeah, I wanted to do this comparison for you guys because the S10 5G literally might be one of the most surprising speakers that I've heard in a while. It is extremely impressive. So let's go ahead and compare them. Is that right? Let's go ahead and put all these at max volume. All of these have Dolby Atmos on. They all have excellent speakers, but you know, I just want to see. Alright, we'll start with the S10 5G. Yeah, it's just much louder. Yeah, so the S10 5G speakers definitely sound the loudest here, the punchiest here. It is a very impressive speaker to me. All of these actually sound identical. So that's pretty interesting. But yes, so the speaker quality on the S10 5G is amazing. So if you guys are considering buying a older Samsung phone, as far as the cameras go, they all pretty much have the same camera setup, except for, you can see, the S10 has only a ultra wide, doesn't have the telephoto, but they all take the same pictures, literally take the same type of pictures. They all take excellent photos, shoot great in 4K as well. You do have those depth sensors up front on the Plus and the 5G version. Yeah, these are awesome photo takers. So that's also one thing that I highly recommend. You get a great camera for 200, 200 something dollars. So that's also something very impressive. So guys, consider buying a S10 series phone in 2022.